Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Summer of Listening series. We're just giving people time to trickle in. So if you can just hang out and have some patience, and we'll start shortly. Thank you for being here on your Friday afternoon. Happy Friday. Welcome, everybody. We're still giving folks time to trickle in. Thank you for being here with us.
We can't hear you, Lisi. There you go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to everybody that's streaming live from Facebook. Welcome to our Summer of Listening series. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to everybody to the first in our Summer Listening series, Anti-Blackness in the Asian American and Pacific Islander Communities. This series of conversations interrogating Asian American and Pacific Islander history of anti-Blackness is hosted in partnership with the UCI Humanities Center, South Asia Network, US Census, the Orange County Asian and Pacific Islander Community Alliance, and finally, the Orange County Meet and Eat Coalition, which is a partnership of AAPI community organizations and ANTI-BLACKNESS, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Serving Institution programs at colleges in Orange County. On behalf of the Planning Committee, my name is Alisi Tulua, and I am a program manager with AAPI, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. So we're really excited that all of you have taken the time on this beautiful Friday afternoon to join us. And I would be remiss to not acknowledge the fact that we're having this conversation because of the many things that are happening in this country, including anti-Asian violence, including racism that is affecting our Black communities. And it has given us the opportunity to have a conversation as a community about our role in dismantling racism. In our first session, we want to address our beloved AAPI community. We understand that part of our contribution to this conversation is having a conversation with our own families. So we are asking, dear community, why do Black Lives Matter to AAPIs? And we have an experienced group of AAPI leaders to guide us in conversation and history. And so I'm going to introduce those that are going to be on our panel today. I'd like to welcome and introduce Marianne Fu, who is the Executive Director of the Orange County Asian and Pacific Islander Community Alliance, AAPI. We are also, will be joining us is also Ellen An, who is the Executive Director of Korean Community Services, which is located in Buena Park and services thousands of Korean American clients across Orange County. Joining us also is Neomai Tayone, who is a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a fierce Tongan activist in Orange County. And lastly, we will be joined by Shika Bhatnagar, who is the Executive Director of South Asia Network and has been a strong advocate for South Asians in Los Angeles and Orange County. Please ask any questions through your Facebook comments and we'll also in the chat, and we'll leave time at the end of this conversation for the speakers to answer any questions that you may have. Each of our community leaders after this will have prepared a letter to our community and will be speaking to all of you watching about their own experiences and the history that they have had with anti-Blackness in our AAPI spaces. And with that, I'd like to welcome Marianne.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining on this really important subject. As well as thank you to the organizers. And so what I love about this gathering is that we're each presenting a letter or a discussion point around why Black Lives Matter. And it's personal to each of us. And so I'm going to read my letter. And it's really about my lessons learned when I was younger. So dear Asian American and Pacific Islander community, why Black Lives Matter? When I was 9 years old, my mother, it was my birthday, and she gave me this box, and I thought, oh, it's the Barbies I wanted. And I was so excited. And when I opened up the box, I saw it was books. And, you know, an Asian parent always does this. They give books. But what I saw was a children's book series on civil rights. And I really didn't understand, why would she give me this, you know? And so she told me, Marianne, you know, one of the reasons why I gave you these books that talk about civil rights, that talk about Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King Jr. is because when I was your age, I was incarcerated in an internment camp for being Japanese American. Even though I had never been to Japan, even though I was born here, even though my parents were born here and were from Hawaii, and none of us had been to Japan, we were imprisoned for 4 years. And I want you to read these books because I need you to understand the history and all the things that are wrong and the injustices that have happened to Americans. And so at night, my mom would tell me these stories, you know, about all of these civil rights leaders. She would talk about the students who were sitting in at the lunch counter. She'd talk about Brown versus Board of Education and about the need to desegregate. And then she would weave in our own family history to make it personal, because it wasn't just about African Americans, but it was about all of us. And so I would grow up hearing about how our family, even though we've been in the United States since 1865, even though there's 8 generations of my family here, we didn't have the same rights. She would talk about how not only had they been interned for 4 years, they could only take a suitcase and they lost everything else. And that once they returned home, the racism that she had endured, you know, rocks being thrown at her, not being able to go into stores, couldn't work in certain places, and not having any rights. We talked about my Chinese side, my grandfather being born here and his family coming here in the 1860s. My grandfather being in the United States Army as a citizen during World War I. But that his own father couldn't get citizenship because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And my dad, and this is all, you know, this is all within my lifetime. My dad having a college degree, you know, in engineering, but not being allowed to work anywhere else but a Chinese grocery store. Also, my mom would talk about the reason why we lived in a farm or out in the country is because Asians weren't allowed to live in town. People of color were not allowed to live in certain areas. And so they were placed in areas that were really far from any access. And she talked about the segregation that they had endured. And I thought about, you know, my own history of racism and me being afraid to walk to school because people used to target me. We had an active KKK and they would advertise in the newspaper. And so there would be young men who would try and run me over when I was walking to school, using me as target practice or throwing beer bottles at my head. I remember the anti-Japanese, you know, when in the 80s, when people were so angry at Japan for the products in the cars and all of the hate crimes that had occurred, and me just being really ashamed of being Asian. And so, and just wanting to live, just because of their racism. And so when I just talked to my mom the other night, and I was saying, why did you give me all those books? I understand, you wanted to talk about civil rights and you wanted to weave in our own stories, but why give me the books? And she said, I gave you those books when you were growing up because you needed to understand history. You needed to understand about leaders and community members from the African American communities who were willing to risk all, willing to die for us, willing so that we would have rights and be able to vote, to own land, and to become citizens. You can't forget them because they're your history and they're your family too. And so throughout my entire life, my parents would remind me about how the African American community has led us in civil rights and how the NAACP and other African American civil rights groups have stood up for us. That when Vincent Chin was murdered, who came forward? NAACP. That when the Chinese Exclusion Act was presented, who was the person that spoke out about it? It was the first Black Senator, Blanche Bruce, who spoke out and said that this was wrong and that he fought against the Chinese Exclusion Act and really fought for equitable treatment of all. And so every time in history that there's been a wrong committed against Asians and others, Black leaders have always come forward to stand up for this injustice. And so when we think about right now, Black Lives Matter, we think about George Floyd, think about Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, and thousands of the Black community members, children, adults, elders that have been killed. How many more must die for Black lives to matter? And this is what the protesters are marching for. They're taking risks so people wake up to the atrocities and injustices happening to the Black communities for hundreds of years. For Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities, we think about Korean comfort women. We think about the Khmer Rouge. We think about the North Vietnamese communities, communist soldiers. We think about how our communities have been killed, hurt, or attacked because someone hated them because of who they are, for no other reason. And this is why there's protests related to Black Lives Matter. Because just like our own concerns and protests about human rights in our own countries of origins, we're having the same thing here in the United States. Black Lives Matter protesters are seeing the lack of human rights and are willing to risk so much to educate others and to fight for the rights of all. The Black Lives Matter movement is about justice, equity, and human rights. And the racism and discrimination that has pounded against Black community is vicious and doesn't stop. I mistakenly thought when we had elected President Obama, the first Black president, things were getting better, but I was wrong. Is this the type of world that we want to live in, when a community is so discriminated against and targeted as if their lives do not matter? The Black community has stood up for the Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community time and time again throughout our histories. And yes, we've had community conflicts. We have to be real about that. And yes, we've had misunderstandings. And yes, we've had struggles with the Black community. But when we've had no rights, they've helped us to fight to gain the rights of citizenship, of voting, of owning land, of equity. Now it's our turn to say Black Lives Matter. And I hope every parent does what my mom did when I was growing up and tell your kids a story about what's happening today, of the protests for Black Lives Matter, because anti-Blackness must end. Because when Black Lives Matter, everyone else gets uplifted too. When we fight for equity, anti-Blackness, anti-racism, and anti-discrimination against Blacks, it impacts us all for the better, and has been shown time and time again throughout history. So I'm just at the beginning of this whole discussion, and I really look forward to what everyone else has to say, because this concern of Black Lives Matter is a concern for the Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities. And I hope that as a community, we come together and are able to support this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you for kicking us off with those reminders and grounding us in that history. I'd like to invite Ellen to read her letter.
Hi, everyone. I took this literally and I actually wrote a letter. When asked to speak, I thought, who am I to speak to this greater Asian community about this issue? One voice can't speak to our diverse, complex, and rich community. and capture all the reasons why Black Lives Matter. But I can speak as a lifelong Southern California Korean immigrant and a community social worker. So my letter is to the community I claim intimately as my own, Orange County Korean Americans. And so for you non-Koreans, please bear with me, but I do hope some themes resonate. Here goes. Dear Koreans in Orange County, ours is a relatively short history in the US of close to 120 years. And as we think about this epical moment of race reflection, I hope we can see themes emerge in our effort to support Black lives. Our history began in Hawaii as indentured workers performing backbreaking labor for white sugar plantation owners. This immigration history was, however, abruptly cut short in 1920 when we were completely barred from entering the US because of the Oriental Exclusion Act. The only law in American history that barred entrance solely based on race. And during the 1940s, for those of us few who remained, we witnessed the horrors of the Japanese internment. But we, fearing reprisal and racism for the color of our skin, we wore not Jap buttons to survive. I am sure we saw the injustice, but our own history of colonization, compounded with our powerlessness here in the US, forced us to be wedges as opposed to allies. Today, the overwhelming majority of us are here because of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which eliminated race-based quotas. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were precursors to and set the stage for the very immigration law which allows us to be on this Zoom. And when the immigration gates opened, hundreds of thousands of us came to create this community of ours. So before I begin my letter in earnest, let me say loud and clear. All of us Koreans are here and indebted to Black lives and the civil rights protesters of the 1960s. So I have 3 parts to my letter. The first part, dear older first generation Korean Americans, most of you left Korea for a better life. You left the poverty of a devastated post-war economy. You remember life under Japanese annexation. You understand a people's history being eradicated. You also know how precious democracy and freedom are and what it feels like under military police oppression. You also know the pain of senseless death and having your humanity trampled on. Surely you can identify with the pointless deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many, many more. You also know what it feels like to be marginalized in the US because of language, race, and immigrant status. You were outsiders, underprivileged, and vulnerable. You know what it feels like to not have your talents, skills, what makes you wonderful, interesting human beings not recognized. So surely you can identify with the countless Black and brown neighbors who, despite their hard work, never seem to get ahead. I respectfully ask you to consider your conscious and unconscious stereotypes against Blacks. You come from Korea, a homogeneous nation known as the Hermit Kingdom. And I'd like to think that your stereotypes, biases exist because our only exposure is from the stereotypes fed to us. And because we were so incredibly busy trying to make a life for ourselves in the US, too busy to think of things except survival, to think of anything else. Well, those stereotypes actually enable a system that creates hurt and destruction for others, a hurt that you know intimately so well in another context. So as you all age and think about a legacy you will leave our Korean American community, I ask that you reflect on your hardships and find empathy to ally yourselves with Black lives. It's not as far away from your experience as you think. Part 2, dear adult second-gen Korean America, I belong to this cohort. As a fellow middle-aged Korean American, I ask all of you to think beyond yourselves and consider the future we want for our children. I, like many of you, lived through the LA riots, Saigu, the precursor to BLM, nearly 30 years ago. perhaps the single most significant modern event for our community. We took up guns to protect the businesses our parents worked so hard to build, and we watched most of them burn. Our cries for the police were left unheard as our home, Koreatown, the symbolic center of our diaspora in the US, took the brunt of the damage while places like Beverly Hills got protected. After those horrific few days, we learned the hard way that misunderstanding between minority groups begets senseless damage, and that victimization occurs on many, many levels when there is a lack of visibility and political power. Our collective political identity was born then, but in the decades since, in our comfort and in our successes, in our bubbles, we have forgotten about this pain and the history that led to it. And at times we have been silent accomplices to systemic injustice because, quite honestly, we benefited. Despite hitting our own bamboo ceilings, our parents taught us to keep our heads low, work hard, and not speak up. For the most part, this has served us individually well, but as a collective, a community, are we really okay with this? Are we really better off than 30 years ago? Many of us are now professionals, mostly middle managers, and do not have to worry about our next meal like our parents. Simply put, we have some privilege. So let's put it to use. Our community worked too hard to build lives here in the US to be okay with in-between status, in between Black, brown, and those with complete privilege white, not fully privileged, but satisfied with some since it's better than none. Is this the US we call home, the US we want for our children? Surely we now have the space and economic luxury to be more impactful and to dream of more than just in-between wedge status. And just a side PS to my mom friends, my middle-aged mom friends, most of us know all too well the college admissions frenzy. Yes, your kids may have a higher SAT score than the Black kid who got into UCLA, but your kid will be just fine, and the world will be better for it. As a mom of a working adult now, I can confidently tell you what you teach your kid about the world, not what name brand school he attends, really matters. Don't we want to be the parents that our kids admire because we embody what is right for the collective and not just what is beneficial for our family alone? Our kids see right through our hypocrisy and selfishness. So please, please support ACA 5. Your kids will love you for it. Part 3, finally, dear young Korean Americans, the nation you see as adults now is a nation that is, simply put, messed up. The response to the pandemic that forces us to meet virtually today rather in person has been an abject failure. The protests many of you so heroically led and participated in have opened up wounds that have festered for many years before many of you were even born. Insidious racism disguised nowadays as populism has left our healthcare, our economic livelihoods in disarray, and for many of our Black community members, actual death. I want to simply say thank you for your courage and hope. Your ability to see that things can change and that you have the power to change it reverberates to many more than you think. I want to say thank you for calling out the API community to self-reflect. And I want to say thank you for giving me, older folks like me, a vocabulary, implicit bias, microaggression, they, them, theirs. These are newfound words to express things that I have felt lifelong. Watching you march in a rainbow of colors from newscasts mostly because I was too old and afraid of coronavirus was cathartic and allowed many like me who have spent our careers facing overt and at times subversive racism, you allowed us, ironically, to actually breathe. From someone older but not necessarily wiser than you, thank you. I have great hope in our future as Korean America because of you. I want to end this letter by addressing my fellow Korean Christians. Nearly 80% of us identify as Christian in the US, and the church is central to our community. as we reflect on George Floyd and countless other victims, as we think about police brutality and the systems all of us work and live in, I hope we reflect on concepts near to us: justice, mercy, righteousness. Christ stood with the marginalized and saw the hypocrisy of those in power. Let the countless hours spent hearing sermons in Korean church be practiced in our daily lives and not be in vain. So I end this letter as I began. Who am I to speak? These are just my personal musings, my reflections, my thoughts to my family, church friends, and neighbors about why something seemingly so distant as Black Lives Matter matters to us Koreans in Orange County. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Although your letter was to the Korean community, I know that as a Pacific Islander, I felt seen in that letter. Thank you for those words. Next, I'd like to invite Niamai to please share your letter with us.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you for this opportunity. Dear community, Black Lives Matter. Malo lau malie kakaitonga, malo lele family mehe otumotu Pasifiki. Greetings to you, my Pacific Islander relatives. We have work to do. I am a first-generation Tongan, mother, sister, auntie, and activist. I share this with you because there are important positions for me to speak from today. And before I go on, I pause to give thanks to our Creator God and acknowledge the land in which I am hosted. I write you from a traditional land on the Tongva, Gabrielino, and Achaman, otherwise known as Orange County. George Floyd's murder comes to a no surprise to any of us, as we've seen murder upon murder with little to no repercussions for officers. The state sanctions violence over the years of young Black men, women, and children should be a reason for the alarm of all of us. Philando Castile, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many more. Each murder is a stark reminder that our country has to reckon with its history to understand its marred present-day existence. I am here to tell you her story and speak candidly with my own community, the community of the Pacific, not forgetting that we too have Black communities within our Pacific. As a Tongan and/or Pacific Islander, many of us understand what it means to experience racism, stereotype threats, implicit biases, microaggression, or police brutality at the hands of officers. I think back at the first time my father was pulled over and asked to walk the line, whether he had any Maui Wowie and why his eyes were so red. As I bolted forward to tell the officer that my dad has been working in the sweltering heat of Moreno Valley sun to explain his bloodshot red eyes, my father quickly calmed me down and told me, "Be quiet." As I sat and listened to the most powerful man I knew to be subjected to this type of treatment, I can somewhat imagine what other families may have experienced. Although I walked away with my father, my many fathers, brothers, sisters do not walk away. As a Tongan Pacific Islander, we know well what our family means to us, and even more, we understand what it means to Fua Fatongia and Fua Kavenga, carry responsibilities for and with one another. This one is ours as well. Like many of you, I too grew up with our Black relatives, both in our families and in other communities. When anyone was in our care, they were in our care of the whole clan and family. As a mother, I knew it was important for my children to be part of the spaces that highlighted Black Lives Matters. When the call for Pacific Islanders for Black Lives Matters came to Anaheim, I took my children. I was so grateful that I saw other mothers and grandmothers that were there to greet us. You have so much power as a mother to help your children reconcile of how they feel and how they want to show up and be in the community with the movement to support and change policies that impact our Black relatives and communities as a whole. I encourage you as mothers to pray for what is happening, but to also do self-work, to ask ourselves how we can be more anti-racist. For example, let's talk about why we tell our daughters to go sit down and get out of the sun. Where does that come from? Or how do we speak to our children about the partners they bring home? They're all the things that we can do in our own home to help our children know that we not only stand with them at Black Lives Matter protests, but we're making sure our home also holds the same values. The years of imperialism and colonialism in the Pacific have left us thinking in these ways that we really need to revisit and unpack. I am doing the same with mine, and I hope that you are too and will join me. As a sister, we are our family's keeper. We help each other as sisters, but we also help maintain the VOD, the spaces within, especially with our brothers. As a sister, I've gone out to certain restaurants here in the OC with my brother and experienced different types of services. My brother, who wore huge dreadlocks, has tattoos on his arms and neck at the time, stopped by to catch lunch with us. In trying to keep track of my own values of supporting mom and pops, we stopped by the local mom and pop shop that we usually eat at. Not only was the service the poorest that I've ever experienced, it was done in such a disdain of my brother, where the waiter practically poured our soup on the table and stared at my brother down as if to ask for us to leave. We didn't stay for the rest of the meal, but we understood that in Orange County, we have our own reckoning in our own history. As a sister, I'm encouraging all sisters to start asking about the history of Orange County and how we've supported and not supported our Black relatives. I know that my experience has been that of unfavorable and empathize with others who have experienced this, but we really have to know our own neighbors and the history of our cities, counties, to help to protect and save and serve our families better. Our brothers, I ask the same of you to do so, speaking with your brothers. The talanoa or talk stories will help us all be better stewards and support the systems of our Black relatives. As an auntie, you have so many nieces and nephews. Please take time to sit down and listen to your nieces and nephews. They have so much to share about their Black friends and families that are experiencing life right now. And as an aunt, you have their ears to start in a way As an aunt, you have their ears and hearts in a way that their parents don't, as the young adults and youth especially. So please use your power responsibly. Ask questions. Let them tell you what's going on, because they know better than anyone and what's going on in the world. And if their parents don't understand, help them have these tough conversations about Black Lives Matters movement. And when you can and feel comfortable, share your own stories so they may know where you're coming from in a place of sincerity. Black Lives Matters to us all. Help them have those conversations with their families. And as a Pacific Islander activist, learn when to speak up and when we and I can have a seat and just listen. It's so important for us to be honest and know our role and where we are. We are so mafana, amped up, juiced up, but we don't let that be the reason why you speak over Black relatives. Give the platform when needed, speak up when needed, do the hard work, learn on your own, speak with your families, and be careful when you speak to Black relatives about their own experiences so as not to re-traumatize them. We have so much work to do, my Pacific Islander friends and Asian American families, but I'm so grateful that I'm grateful to be doing the work alongside each of you in support of our Black communities. Dua ofatu, proud activist.
Thank you so much, Nilmai. Thank you for the reminder that we all have a role to have this conversation within our own families. I'd like to hand it off to Shika.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for allowing me to write this letter to our community today. So I will jump right into it. Dear community, especially my fellow South Asian Americans, Black Lives Matter to Asian American communities because our histories, our stories of slavery and indentured servitude are intertwined. Revisionists, or those who are simply unaware, may try to separate us with a model minority myth narrative or by claiming that as later immigrants, Asian Americans are divorced from the scars of Black slavery and anti-Black racism in this country. However, the well-documented truth is that brown and Black bodies have long been considered and still often are considered as equally expendable by the white man. And the truth is that the success of South Asian Americans, the dreams that so many of us and our families have been able to achieve in this country are built on the backs of Black Americans who built this country but have been denied the fruits of their labor, an opportunity to equally partake in the idea of liberty and justice for all. As Asian Americans, we should not and cannot separate ourselves from the traumas that Black communities have experienced in this country by this country. The impacts of slavery, rape, torture, and murder are stories and scars we must confront as Americans, regardless of whether our ancestors were here when slavery was permissible under the law. By adopting this country as our own, we must also confront its many faults. And as immigrants and children of immigrants from countries that have also faced the brutalities of the white man through colonization, it is our responsibility to be part of the dialogue and part of the solutions that lead to justice for Black Americans. I would be remiss if I didn't address the brown elephant in the room, anti-Black racism that is so prevalent in our communities. While these ideas may have roots again in British colonialism, it is now fully ours. South Asians as a community are racist towards Black people. Full stop, period. Let's say it again, let's acknowledge it, and let's not try to defend it. It's time for our communities to have honest, raw, and painful conversations about why this racism and its cousins, colorism and caste discrimination, are so deeply rooted in our culture and how to address them. Statements about South Asians for Black Lives or Black Lives Matter statements from South Asians who also support the suppression and oppression of minority voices in our motherlands must also face their own hypocrisies and virtue signaling. So what are these steps and solutions? They begin with the self, acknowledging one's own racism and biases. They extend to our families. When a parent or an uncle or an aunt says something that is racist against Black people, Do you stay quiet or do you acknowledge and try to educate? How do South Asians in academic settings advocate for more Black representation on campus and faculty? In work environments, how do we show up for the Black community as advocates and mentors? And as community leaders, like all of us, how do we create more sustainable collaborations and, more importantly, learn from Black organizers who have been entrenched in this work on some level or another in this country for centuries? As the executive director of the South Asian Network, one of the oldest South Asian social justice organizations in the United States, we definitely need to do better. We need to have more conversations, we need to reach out, and we need to participate more fully in the Black Lives Matter movement. The conversation that we're having today is really just the beginning. One of the most profound connections that the Indian subcontinent and the Black racial justice movement in the US have is the concept of satyagraha, or nonviolent resistance. As many already know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was heavily influenced by these teachings that originated from Mahatma Gandhi. But in recent years, Gandhi's own anti-Black racism has been under scrutiny by scholars. But I recently came across an article that was written by a well-respected Indian historian, Ramachandra Guha, who sought to correct the record. That yes, Gandhi did have racist attitudes towards Black people as a young man, but through his own education and observations and what he learned about the Black civil rights movement here in the US, his own views evolved, and he became a champion for the equality of all races. And I found this poignant because it demonstrated that racism is not a permanent condition. Through a willingness to learn, we can be more inclusive human beings. And secondly, it demonstrated that learning is not a one-way street. While MLK Jr. was inspired by Gandhi, so too was Gandhi inspired by what he saw from Black activists in the US and South Africa. As Gandhi so powerfully stated, the real white man's burden is not insolently to dominate colored or Black people under the guise of protection. It is to desist from the hypocrisy which is eating into them. It is time white men learnt to treat every human being as their equal. There is no mystery about whiteness of the skin. It has repeatedly been proved that given equal opportunity of man, be he of any color or country, is fully equal to any other. Black lives matter to Asian American communities because our pasts, our present, and our futures are inseparable. Without their struggles, we just wouldn't be here. And without unconditional solidarity between Asian and Black communities, our future in this country will certainly be bleak. As Asian Americans, we have a lot of work to do to support our Black brothers and sisters. So let's get to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shika. At this time, I want to first, before we move on to some questions, I want to express my gratitude, and I will take liberty to speak on behalf of everybody that's here, to all of you for sharing your voices and sharing your letters. I think each of them have spoken to an element of my own experience. And so from Marianne's story about how Black communities have really showed up in history to fight for our own issues, to Ellen really laying out generation by generation what the conversations need to be, and Nelmai's reminder that we have our own roles within our own families. And last but not least, I really appreciate what Shika said about unconditional solidarity. I think I'm walking away really touched by each of you. And before we want to open it up for folks that are here with us today to ask any questions they might have. But while we're waiting for that, I want to pose a question to each of you. What has been the biggest lesson that you've learned about race, and it can be specifically anti-Blackness, in the recent years, especially around recent events in this country? And I'm posing that to any one of you. The biggest lesson.
I'll answer. I mean, watching everything unfold the past few months, although incredibly hopeful, I think the biggest lesson is how our nation just does not learn lessons very well. You know, the Southern California, 1960s, again, 1990s, again, 2020. The themes are very, very similar. And so I hope this time we finally learn our lesson. So, and not have this, you know, disruption, the protests, the damage. You know, we had to board up our offices because the Anaheim protests literally started in front of our office. And as I was nailing plywood to our windows, I was thinking, oh my goodness, not again. And so I hope we learn this round how to do it right and to sustain these protests and not have them, you know, dissolve into history again.
Thank you, Ellen. Marianne or Namai Shika? There you go, Marianne.
Oh.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I was having problems with unmuting. I think exactly what Ellen was saying, that we haven't learned history. I mean, and part of it is we really have to do a lot of education. And school districts really want to integrate more of this into the curriculum. And it's supporting policies, it's supporting school districts, it's supporting this change to integrate beyond just European history. We really have to learn about each other's histories. And we also have to be able to tie it back. So I remember when my son was reading the piano lesson in high school and Trayvon Martin was just killed. And I had talked to him about, did your class talk about Trayvon Martin and how it relates back to the piano lesson and about the way that the African-American communities were treated? And he said, no, we don't talk about anything like that. And so that's where I think one of the things that our children, and we've all talked about that our children really have to understand their own histories, the histories of others, and why it's so important. And being able to integrate that into the curriculum. And also what Ellen was saying about ACA 5. You know, affirmative action is so vital. And we misunderstand it. And we think, oh, it's you know, whoever is the best should get to be moved forward. There's so much institutionalized racism and discrimination in this country throughout history. And until we're able to address that, we'll need things like affirmative action. We need policies that will help us for that education and for that making the system equitable. And so I think it's such a big picture, but I think if we start with our kids and helping them understand all of these issues, that would be great.
Thank you for that, Marianne. Shika O'Neill. We're sharing lessons, yes.
Okay. So the lesson that I wanted to share that continuously always comes up, especially in the Tongan culture, because I could only speak on the Tongan experience, is that even just having a conversation with my parents about, like, when were you exposed to Black, you know, African-American people? And one thing that my mom said is that it was just through Hollywood. It was just through the movies that, because it was like a huge thing to go watch a movie. And my mom always say they projected just a sense of like, you know, like the rags to riches. They were always the hired help. And my mom just kind of shared in her way, like, we always empathized with that because, you know, I just kind of feel sorry is what my mom would say. Because, you know, obviously in Tonga, we weren't the only you know, the only opportunities we had with Black folks is our Fijians, and they're our brothers and sisters. So we don't, you know, the Papua New Guineas, there was a lot of relatives, you know, my family, I am part Fijian too as well. So, you know, we honor these relations with others. However, I do know that Tongans are very racist. Not gonna say that. My mom, I mean, get out of the sun now. I mean, things like our language, this kind of helped me understand myself and even my own people better, because a lot of our language is built on, you know, racist words. You know, and it's horrifying when I try to teach my children the Tongan language, and I'm having to like, you know, explain why we say black is called uli uli, not just one uli uli, but in the Tongan it's uli uli, meaning that emphasis of they're black, and uli means dirty. So uli uli, that's number one understanding of racism in the Tongan culture. That's like racism number 101. And that it pains me, because, you know, I grew up this way, and a lot of times, yeah, we migrated from Tonga to find a better economic, you know, opportunity. But I would like Tongan people to understand, because a lot of them are like, no, it's not about color, it's not about that. Oh, you know, Black folks are just crying about it. I hear too much complaints, but they can't go and you know, pick fruits or something like that. Tongans, wake up. I mean, it is our reality that we share in the same. We forget that we grew up in Inglewood, that Black people are our allies, because not only, you know, like just where we're standing is all Black, but even the way we act, even the way we speak, even the way we edge our hairs, and the way we even look. We embrace Black culture, and it's sad that we in turn on them. So that's why my letter was focused on like all of us to like unpack the things that we say in private, because we may be out in the world, Black Lives Matters, but then we make fun of a lot of, you know, we downgrade the Black experience in our own homes, you know, and just things like don't bring a Black partner here because they're not welcomed, or, you know, like saying getting out of the sun and how our skin looks, you know. So this is what this conversation allows myself to just kind of like think like, what am I doing that might be anti-Black? Because I catch myself like, wow, I'm in a way, I'm racist. I'm racist of a lot of the things that I even speak about. So when I took the kids there, I had to speak on the complicity of, you know, ourselves as Tongans, even to go out there in a Pacific Islander Black Lives Matters protest, and just kind of like in a way I felt like, you know, a lot of the speakers more Tongans, and, you know, we started to, you know, sing in Tongan. I just feel like Tongan people, you guys need to understand that you guys can't co-opt certain things, that you guys needed, like, not one of those speakers spoke up about racism. Not one of those speakers that were from the churches actually addressed it. They came in such a way that I felt like they came on an all life matters type of approach than a Black Lives Matters. And that's why when I stood up, I had to bring my children, because I had to let other people know, yes, I am Tongan, but look at my children. Look at them. They have Black attributes. They have friends that are Black. I'm talking about, like, these are the boys that run with them. My son gets followed in Target. He actually followed me one evening when I was walking my dog in a hoodie with his cousin brother, 2 Black hoodies, running after me because they wanted to protect me. And I turned around and I scolded them. I said, how many times have I told you, stop putting a hood on and running at night? This is the reality that me as a mother, as a Tongan mother, has to still collectively share the experience of a Black mom that I have to tell my Tongan son, why are you coming to protect me when you are exposing yourself to danger? This is a conversation that continuously, like, I have to revisit this because I am a mom. And that's why I came as a mother, because a lot of the Tongan moms, they do not recognize this. They are so busy in their churches. They are so busy in their choir practices. They can't even see that their children are being exposed to this and they could be in danger. So this is the conversation that I want to speak on about. It's so real to us Tongans. And that's why I really thank you for the opportunity. I didn't let this opportunity escape me because I wanted other Tongans to hear that we too are Black. We share the Black experience. We speak of Black terminologies. I embrace the Black culture because they saved me. They gave me my voice. They gave me my curves. They gave me a reason for me to fight for. And I am so grateful for that. That's why I will go back for anything that you need me. I am there because I understand, and I'm very grateful for the struggle of Black leaders like Martin Luther King, Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, Malcolm X. I mean, reading of their struggles, it just empowered me because as I'm reading them, it builds, my esteem. It makes me realize my actualization, like who I am, because I have to discover myself as a Tongan before I can even understand anybody else. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Neil. We have somebody that would like to ask a question. Angela Liu. She has a question to ask our speakers. And then following that, we're going to stop our live stream on Facebook because we want to get into a little bit more of intimate conversation in breakout rooms. So please hang around. We still have some time and we wanted to get into a smaller group so that we can have conversations with each other. So I want to hand it over to Angela to ask a question, and then following that, we'll go into breakout rooms.
Thank you, everybody, for putting this on and for everything that you're sharing. So I have Filipino and Chinese relatives. How do you start a conversation when you think that somebody is exhibiting anti-Black racism? Because in the past, it can seem like they go on the defensive really fast. So how do I approach that with empathy and compassion so that it can turn into a dialogue so that we can move toward education?
Thank you, Angela. Any of you, our panelists can answer.
So I can, I reflected on the letter I was going to write, and I could have wrote a more sermonizing letter talking about how the world should be, but I didn't. I wrote it from the perspective of talking to my parents and talking to my church friends who, Black Lives Matter is just something they see on the news. And I approached it with trying to find common points in their lives, not necessarily what is right or wrong. They're gonna shut down, but finding a point where they can reflect on something in their lives and relating it to Black Lives Matter in a kind and gentle way is the way you need to speak to people to effectuate change. Their change can happen in a lot of ways. There are the shouters, and then there are the whisperers. But if you're in a position where you can effectuate and be a whisperer to your family and can change 1, 2, 3, that's how movements start. And so that's what I would recommend. I live in a family of many of those, and I completely empathize.
Thank you, Ellen.
Can I jump in there? Hi. So what I have currently experienced this with some of my family members is that I was walking by and my husband was having a conversation with a family member, and I just overheard a lot of this pro-American talk. I jumped at it. I jumped it like head on in. I dived right in there and I said, I had to help them recognize. I said, I understand exactly what you're saying, but you guys speak of white privilege because some of them they're white, they're half Tongan, half German. And to hear them speak about so much privilege, not only as a man, but as a light-skinned Tongan, I just heard them going, well, you know what? We come here as Tongans and we work hard and we make it. You know, we become very successful. And I said, hold up. You made it, but you are light-skinned Tongan people. So you white appropriate. And I tell you, my husband went off on me. We kind of went on a tangent. But I said, you have white privilege. You have to recognize that. My family, myself, I'm a little bit more deep-rooted. I didn't have those opportunities. I didn't have that. It didn't come easy for me. I actually had to fight for it. I didn't get things easy, as I saw that my husband kind of, he slid his way through because of that connection that, being a light-skinned Tongan and a family that comes from that. So sometimes you just have to be direct. You can't allow an opportunity to educate them. And I also went out on saying, our names make a big difference. You guys have, my husband's name is Spiri Olsen Fonua. That doesn't sound Tongan. All of his cousins, they have all these names like, that are not really, Tongan rooted, like Neomai, Kalesita, Asena, Wata. These are the names of my siblings. When you hear that, there's a different tonality that you even have to say their name in a different way. So that's my experience is if you see this opportunity to teach, being from a person that has learned a lot, you gotta share it. Don't be afraid to share, because you never know. Racism can be unlearned. This is something that we can actually unpack, and people can walk away saying, I really didn't know that. White privilege, I have white privilege? I didn't know that, because see, we are not vocal about what we feel and the abuse that we go through. I had to share that with them, because there was many of times where I was called these demeaning names. I was called, Black and, an angry woman, but, it comes from a place of triumph for myself to find my own voice. So that's just me sharing a little bit about it. And I just want to thank you for this opportunity again, obviously.
Thank you, Nell. Marianne?
I'm sorry, Angela and everyone else who can play a bridge role with their families, that's really important. That's actually protesting, is we occupy a very special space where we understand these issues and we can actually translate this into our community language and into our culture. And that's how movements start, very small. So I just wanted to say to everyone here, it's one thing to, hold up a sign and protest, but if you really want to effectuate change, start, in your neighborhoods and with your family and friends and so on and so on. And that's how we build API voice in saying Black Lives Matter.
Thank you, Ellen. Marianne and Shika, you want to add something to what's been shared?
I actually wanted to address the very first question about lessons learned in terms of everything that's going on. I think going back to everyone's points that we can't have cosmetic solutions anymore, that we need real structural change, going back to Mary Ann's point about education, and that extends, from having more people who look like us and more Black representation in structures of power like local, state, and federal government. And then in terms of the second question, I've been really bad about the whole reaching across in a nice way when somebody says something. And so I don't feel like I'm still learning how to do that in a kind and gentle way. But one thing that I will reflect on that I think is important as a society and communities that are evolving is that as we also integrate that, I find that my own family is becoming so much more open and knowledgeable. The fact that we do have, Black Americans within our family, and that has really changed their perceptions of what a Black person is like, and understandings of the community. And I think that this is a moment that we can all capture to educate, because everybody is aware of it or is talking about it, and this is a great place for us to use that to leverage this moment to educate our own families and our communities. And I know that many of us, I'm sure, also talk to our parents about this. They're the ones that we feel most comfortable in some ways of, if they say something to sort of like, say that's not appropriate. And I think that if we can just extend that to other family members and also expose them to the issues at hand, we're going to have that broader change.
Lacey, if I may just chime in one more last thought. Right now is such an opportune time because the news cannot get any more outrageous. Nooses, Karens screaming about not wearing masks. Like my jaw drops when I read the national news at times. I think we had been living kind of in a post-racial Obama era, bubble that got burst really quickly in 2016. And the last 4 years have been an amazing time. And with this pandemic, a real opportune time to have discussions with families, because I admit, my husband is a Republican, and we have had many discussions where we agree not to, we agree to disagree. But these past few months have created, there's been so much outrage on real basic humanity issues that we've actually come a lot closer together. And he won't be voting Republican this round, but right now is an opportune time to have discussions with your family. I think this is a real important moment in history when we can do that.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I'm going to pivot over to give a little bit of time for folks to get in more discussion with each other. But before we move to that, I want to, because we will be cutting off our streaming on Facebook Live, I want to say thank you to everybody that's tuned in on Facebook. This is the first of a series of conversations that we're holding centered on anti-Blackness in AAPI community. Next week will be our second session, and we'll be running every Friday for the next 4 Fridays from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock Pacific time. And our conversation next week will be centered on education and social justice. What is the role of affirmative action? This is a very timely conversation, so we hope that you will tune in next week. If not, just watch this space and look out for the flyer. But with that, I want to say thank you to our panelists. You can stick around and join our discussion in the breakout rooms. I think it would be really valuable to have you in that space. But I want to say thank you to everybody that's tuned in and hang out and build community with us. We have until 1:30, so we'll probably break out for 10 to 15 minutes and have a conversation with each other, and then come back and close out. But with that, I want to hand it over to Annie. But before that, there's a reminder. Please don't forget to fill out your census. And please let everybody else in your family know to fill out their census. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Annie to give instructions on breakout rooms.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And big thank you to Alicia, our moderator, and all 4 of our speakers. I am not an emotional person, but I definitely teared up, and it's so meaningful to hear all of this addressed. So really thank you. So I have stopped streaming to Facebook, and now we'll be moving to Breakout Rooms. So we wanted to give space for all of our partners and community members to discuss more about this. And we have a few community agreements and also some discussion questions. So I'm going to break you out into breakout rooms, but as you all are there, could you please remember these, I think, 5 things. So please remember to be curious, open, and respectful. Remember 1 mic, so please respect the person talking. Take space, make space. So ask yourself, why am I talking? Or wait. Speak from your own experiences and be mindful of time. Our speakers are welcome to join us as well in conversation. So these are going to be your discussion questions, and if you could introduce yourself, your pronouns, and your affiliations once you break out. I think that's probably brilliant. And then we'll come back together and have like kind of some share out and community discussion. Are there any questions so far? Okay, cool.
Maybe you can remind us how much time we have in the discussion groups. And then also, it may not be possible for all the groups to address all 5 questions, but maybe the groups can decide what most interests them.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Judy. So you'll have about 12 minutes, and then we'll come back together. Okay, I'm gonna do breakout rooms. Okay, and you should all get your invitations. You're unmuted. Oh, there we go.
I came back here because I actually have to go, so I just wanted to.
Oh, thanks for coming, Tammy.
Hey, Annie, can you hear me? Yeah, you don't have to move me because I'm technically in 2 meetings, but
That's fine.
I'll just hear the debrief afterwards. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we're just about to finish up.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Hey, Zainab.
Hi.
How was that timing? How was that?
It was good.
It
I mean,
was
we
good.
Okay. And then everyone was able to unmute themselves too, right? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think, oh no, I guess maybe I was muted when I first came in. But
I'll just make sure to change that one.
for those who are joining us, feel free to, yeah, share your video.
Oh, there's so many. I've never seen a Zoom meeting with this many this many videos.
This calls for a picture.
Should we take a screenshot?
Yeah.
We need more men. Where are the men?
I see a man. There's Tomas. Hi, Tomas.
Hello.
I see you, Eddie.
There's
All right.
another man there.
Rowena.
Hi,
I see a
Sanjay.
couple of men.
Oh, there's
right.
Sanjay. Hi, Sanjay.
Let's take a picture first and then we'll debrief. So on the count of 3, I'm gonna take a screenshot. So everyone smile, okay? Ready, 1, 2, 3. And then I'll take one with the other page because there's 2 pages. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us. It sounds like you all had really lively discussion. I wanted to give space for you all to kind of share maybe what you said in your debrief. And I know not everyone, it might be familiar with you. So I think the floor is open now if you want to say your name, pronouns, and then whatever you want to say.
I'm just going
Annie,
to.
are you calling on us?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to ask Annie, will you call on us? Like, are you going in order of breakout?
No. I was just going to let because there were 14 breakout rooms. So I was just going to let anyone speak. And I did want to try to end at 1:30-ish.
I have to apologize. I do need to leave at 1:30. I'm Judy Wu, for those who don't know me, and I direct the UCI Humanities Center. And I wanted to thank so much our speakers. I was like crying and sniffling, and you just expressed such moving experiences and wisdom. I just really loved everything that you shared. So thank you so much. And I'm so glad to see so many people who are interested and want to engage in this conversation.
And same with Judy, I also have to jump off at 1:30 for another meeting. And I guess I can start summarizing my breakout room 2. I was the note taker. We loved all the questions that were posed, and we just started from a place of wanting to be productive and trying to define anti-Blackness, giving a definition for it. And then it turned out to be much more complicated because we were starting to talk about its different meanings and the way it manifests, and the different actions, and that looks differently depending on what AAPI community you belong to, which is why this being a series is so great, because I think when we talk about everyday racism and colorism that's coming up later, there's going to be a lot of kind of personal reflection. And I think it was Patty who gave a really nice summary of anti-Blackness as kind of othering the Black community, and also, gaining from our own proximity to whiteness or white privilege at the expense of this kind of serving as this wedge. So, when we adopt the model minority identity or myth, then we are, in a sense, inflicting that kind of anti-Blackness and doing harm onto Black communities. And I will stop there. Anyone else from Breakout 2 want to jump in and add?
No, I thought you did a great job.
Thank you, Clea and Patty and Judy. I guess I'll go in order then. Breakout room 1, did anyone want to say anything?
I was in breakout room 1, and we were a small group, and I really enjoyed listening to a lot of people a lot younger than me and found it really energetic.
Thanks, Ellen. Anyone else from breakout room 1? Okay, breakout room 3.
Okay, I guess I'll go. So we had a small group as well, but we had really energetic and lively discussion, and I went really deep, and we shared a lot of personal stories, and I think that was pretty like it actually connects with the larger scene, and then I think it was really fruitful in the end, and we came up with some actionable items. So that was great.
Can you name maybe one of the actionable items?
Like just how you use those stories to communicate, educate in your family, and then like what kind of possible ways we can communicate. So that was one of those things.
Thanks, Isabel. Breakout room 4.
Hi, everyone. I was part of Breakout Room 4. My name is Tony, she, her, hers pronouns, staff member EC Irvine. We really appreciated all of the panelists for sharing their authentic stories with us. Really, we each like teared up during the presentations. But I think for us, we talked a lot about the families that we grew up in, how there were a lot of anti-Black ideas that we were raised with, and just kind of thinking about where we are and what is our role in this Black Lives Matter movement, given that we're not part of the Black community, but we're also not part of the white community. I think each of the panelists in sharing their personal stories kind of gave us a lot of food for thought. Even talking about, I think Ellen mentioned that, you can be a whisperer and not a shouter, and really loved how Neomai talked about how, it starts within the family, the nuclear family too, how we use language, and how we teach the next generations. So yeah, we talked quite extensively about that. So thank you all for sharing with us.
Thanks, Tony. Breakout room 5.
Right. Hi, I'm Susan Tomabergen with the School of Education, and I had the pleasure of being with Lillian in our breakout room. And we talked about being the children of immigrants and to be the first generation born here, and some of the conversations we've been having with the people that our families. And we also talked about the next generation like my children, for example, or her nieces and nephews, and how we can have those conversations with them to understand kind of their role in this and how to even be open to and accepting of differences in colors and ethnicities. Lillian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think a lot of like what we talked to was just well, part of what we talked about was some of the anti-Blackness like rhetoric that happens in our family as well, and just how important the language that we use in our families determines our views in the way that we like grow up and how we view other people, and how we like want to unlearn those things and encourage our family members to unlearn those things as well.
Thanks, Susan and Lillian. Breakout room 6.
So that was me, Judy, and Thomas, and we had a really great conversation just about creating change and sort of the ways that we like are being challenged in our own like communities and our own families to push back and create that change. It was a very like beautiful discussion, and yeah, I'm excited to see how many more of these kinds of conversations we can have.
Thanks, Zainab. Breakout room 7.
I'll go ahead. So I was in the breakout with Alyssa and Neomai. So it was the three of us who were on the panel. So we actually didn't cover the topics so much, but I think one thing that came out, we were talking about our own experiences and how we felt writing the letters. But Alyssa made a point about how it's important for us to sort of confront this in our own sort of individual communities, in addition to sort of the collective API community. And, one thing that I wanted to add, and I think it's important for all of us, is to, and I think that we're often in danger of this in general, is preaching to the choir. And so how do we actually create language and spaces for those who haven't been part of these conversations? And that's going to require, like, as I said, I think during the breakout, changing the language that we use, and not being judgmental, and also creating other spaces for these conversations to happen, not necessarily on like movement listservs or, things like that. And so I think that's really important if we really want to make sustainable change on these issues.
Thanks, Shika. Yeah, I think that's really important to remember that there are other people out there who are in the middle or not on our side that we need to pull with us. Oh, sorry, Neil?
Can I say something? I know we went on a little tangent, but we spoke about something that was really important to me as a woman, because not only are we, people of color, but we're also women.
A lot with the difficulties in discussing families due to their past thinking and exclusionary mentality. They're encouraged that they will be able to discuss more on anti-Blackness in their own families, but it'll take time and it'll be a hard discussion. Group 8, was there anything else you wanted to add?
That's great, QT. I'm glad that she left a message summarizing our proposals. How generous of her. No, I'll just say I really appreciated our group. We shared, is exactly what she said, just we shared, I liked our group because it was intergenerational. And thank you, Naomi, for your story about mothers. And like, I think it is a time of reflection. We have to like, understand where we're at, first, and also in our families. Yeah, I don't know, it's before we start sharing, and I don't know, Lizzie's also part of our group. There she is. Yeah, so we shared a lot of family stories, and I think it's really great that we're having these generative conversations. I don't know if Lizzie wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I really appreciated the conversation we were able to have. And I think it's interesting because, we're like different generations, but at the same time, our family background is different. Your family immigrated earlier, and, my family, I was born in China, I immigrated later. And I think a lot of times even that can have just like a little bit of difference based on, the experiences that our parents had, or like in their home country, or also like when they come here, like, you know, people immigrating now versus like a decade or 2 decades ago have very different experiences. And I mean, there's similarities, but there's also differences. And we were talking also about, you know, how like model minority myth also affects, you know, some things that our parents and our families might be still thinking. Like we were talking about how, you know, I think other speakers mentioned, you know, like we work so hard, you know, it's because we worked hard to get where we are, you know, as if like, you know, everyone in this country starts at the same place, right? You just have to work hard, then you'll get to where everyone else is. But yeah, so I am grateful for the conversations we had. Thank you.
Thanks, Lizzie and Jenny. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. Alicia says that we're way over time, but hang out in the space feels nice. So for any of you who want to leave, please feel free, but I want to also like keep this space for anyone who is available to finish out our conversation. I think we're at group 9. Or did we only have 8 groups? Did I call on everyone?
Well, while you're thinking of that, Annie, I as the speakers were talking, I have a son who's 25 years old and he's getting married this year, and so I'm older than many of you on here, and I did want to say and maybe it's because my group had younger people in it, is be gentle with parents. They love you to death. They immigrated here for you, you know, and so sometimes the defensiveness can create barriers, but they really want to know. I can say this as a mom. I love hearing about what my son thinks. And I may not agree at times and we butt heads, but just keep that dialogue open because they really, really do love you to death, and be gentle. I mean, there's a rage in youth that can sometimes shut down those doors. But these are your parents, and so be kind. And then to the moms and dads out there, we have a special mantle to raise the next generation, empowered girls, but we also in our community have some sexism that we need to address. And so for those moms of boys, particularly, it's really critical that we address some of those issues as we're raising young. I mean, I'm kind of done, but I just wanted to say my 2 bit.
Thank you, Ellen. I always appreciate everything that comes out of your mouth. Yeah, I think those are all the groups. I think we're going to continue this conversation, and please feel free to take back these questions to, you know, your family, your friends, and all the different spaces that you're in, because it's a continuing conversation. It doesn't stop here. So please join us next week at the same time. We'll be talking about education and affirmative action, which will be a really cool discussion. But yeah, so I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.